Everyone thought I was broken. At my husband's funeral, people whispered behind black veils and sympathetic smiles. They looked at me the way you look at someone who's about to disappear. What they didn't know was that I was already watching everything. The flowers on Floyd's grave hadn't even wilted yet when his sons came for me. I remember sitting alone in his home office that afternoon, surrounded by the smell of leather and old paper, the same room where Floyd used to sit late at night, reading contracts, planning expansions, dreaming out loud about our future. 22 years of marriage, reduced to a single meeting. The door opened without a knock. Sydney walked in first, tall, immaculate suit, the kind of man who knew exactly how powerful he looked and enjoyed it. At 45, he had inherited his father's authority, but none of his kindness. Edwin followed, always a step behind, softer face, nervous hands, the kind of man who pretended to care while quietly sharpening the knife. They didn't sit. They stood in front of Floyd's desk like judges. "Colleen," Sydney said, his voice smooth and cold, "we need to discuss the estate." Estate. That word landed heavier than it should have. I tightened my fingers around the armrest of Floyd's chair. The leather was worn where his hands used to rest. That familiar detail was the only thing keeping me grounded. "Go on," I said. Edwin sighed dramatically. "We know this is hard, losing Dad so suddenly. It's been difficult for all of us." All of us. As if they had been the ones sleeping on hospital chairs. As if they had been the ones signing consent forms at 3 a.m. As if they had been there at all. Sydney placed a thick folder on the desk. The sound echoed in the room. "The will is very clear," he said, opening it slowly, almost enjoying the moment. "The primary residence, valued at around $850,000, goes to Edwin and me, jointly." I felt my chest tighten. "The Tahoe property, approximately $750,000, also goes to us. Business assets will be divided between us as well." Each sentence erased another piece of my life. My home, my memories, my marriage. "And me?" I asked, quietly. Edwin shifted uncomfortably. Sydney didn't. "There's a life insurance policy," Sydney said. $200,000. $200,000 for a 63-year-old woman who had walked away from her career to support her husband. For someone who had spent 2 decades hosting dinners, managing households, caring for a dying man. "That should be enough to help you start over," Edwin added gently. Start over. I almost laughed. "And the medical bills?" I asked. Sydney pulled out another document. $180,000 outstanding. As Floyd's spouse, those fall to you. The room tilted. "Do the math. 200,000 minus 180. $20,000. $20,000 to rebuild an entire life." "You'll have 30 days to vacate the house," Sydney continued. "We think that's fair." Fair. They left shortly after. No condolences, no hesitation, no guilt, just efficiency. That evening, I sat alone in Floyd's office as the sun dipped behind the trees. Grief should have been consuming me. Instead, something else crept in. Clarity. I opened the small drawer on Floyd's desk, the one he always kept locked. Inside, beneath old receipts and business cards, my fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. A key. Old brass, smooth from years of handling. I stared at it for a long time. Floyd never kept meaningless things, and that's when I understood something important. They thought they had won. The next morning, I sat across from Martin Morrison, Floyd's longtime attorney. He looked tired, uneasy. "Colleen," he rubbed his temples, "I strongly advise against this. You can contest the will. There are irregularities. And while we fight, how do I pay the bills?" He didn't answer. "What if I," said I slowly, "give them everything?" Martin froze. you'd be giving up millions. I know. But why would you? Because fighting would destroy me, and I don't think Floyd wanted that. Martin leaned back, studying me carefully. In 30 years, I've never seen a client do this voluntarily. I smiled. Then today you will. By the end of the week, I signed everything. The sons smiled. Their lawyers stopped smiling when he read one clause. And as I walked out of that office with nothing but a purse and an old brass key, I felt lighter than I had in months. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Floyd had planned for this moment long before he died.
The bank was quiet,
and I
in the
was
way
about to
serious
find out
places
exactly
always are.
how.
Polished floors, low voices, the soft hum of money changing hands invisibly. I stood at the counter holding the old brass key, unsure of what I was hoping to find, or afraid to find. The manager, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, studied the key carefully. "Yes," she said after a pause, "this belongs to a safety deposit box." My heart skipped. "Box number 317, only 2 authorized names." She looked up at me. Floyd Whitaker and Colleen Whitaker. I hadn't known. Not once in 22 years had Floyd mentioned this. She led me down into the vault, the air growing colder with each step. When she unlocked the metal drawer and slid it toward me, my hands were trembling. "You may take as much time as you need," she said softly, then left me alone. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside were folders, letters, bank statements, and at the very top, an envelope. My name written in Floyd's handwriting. Open last. I set the letter aside. The first document beneath it was a printed email exchange. Sydney's name jumped out at me instantly. My stomach tightened as I read. "Dad's health is declining faster than expected. We need to finalize the transfers before he changes his mind." Another reply followed. "Once the assets are moved, the wife won't have any leverage. She doesn't understand the business side." My hands began to shake. They hadn't just taken advantage of me, they had been planning this while their father was dying. The next folder revealed bank statements for an account I had never heard of. The balance made my breath catch. $4.6 million. Attached was a handwritten note from Floyd. "This is ours. The boys think everything is tied to the properties. It's not." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Floyd hadn't been careless, he had been careful. There were investigation reports, photographs, financial summaries, Sydney entering casinos, Edwin meeting with clients whose savings later disappeared, debt, fraud, desperation. That's why they had been so eager. That's why they had rushed me. And then I found the final folder, another will, dated 6 weeks before Floyd's death. This one left everything to me, the properties, the business, the money, with one handwritten line at the bottom. "Let Colleen decide what my sons deserve." Tears blurred my vision. Floyd hadn't abandoned me. He had trusted me. Finally, I opened the letter. "My dearest Colleen, if you're reading this, then the boys showed you who they really are. I couldn't warn you without exposing the plan. I'm sorry you had to feel alone, but you were never unprotected." He explained everything. The mortgages he had quietly taken out, the debts tied to the properties, the money moved out of reach. They believe they're inheriting wealth, but what they're really inheriting is consequence. By the time I finished reading, my grief had transformed into something sharper. Resolve. That evening, Edwin called. "Colleen," he said warmly, "we were thinking maybe dinner tonight, family time." "Family." I smiled. "I'd love that." Dinner was a performance. Expensive wine, designer clothes, fake concern. They talked about plans for their properties. I nodded politely, then casually mentioned the key. The room froze. "A safety deposit box?" Sydney asked, too quickly. "Yes," I said. "Odd, isn't it?" Panic flickered across his face before he masked it. "You shouldn't trouble yourself with financial paperwork. It can be confusing." "Oh," I replied sweetly, "I think I understand it better than you think." That night, as I drove home, my phone rang. "Mrs. Whitaker," a calm male voice said, "this is James Mitchell. I worked with your husband." I pulled over. "There are things you need to know before you sign anything else."
James Mitchell's office didn't look like the kind of place where million-dollar secrets lived. No marble floors, no glass walls, just a quiet building and a man who looked like he listened more than he spoke. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said gently, shaking my hand, "your husband was a very careful man." That was an understatement. He placed a thick file on the desk between us. "For 8 months," he continued, "Floyd suspected his sons were manipulating him, financially, legally, emotionally." My throat tightened. "He hired me to investigate quietly. He didn't want confrontation. He wanted certainty." Mitchell opened the file. Bank records, forged signatures, wire transfers. "Sydney used company assets as collateral for personal gambling debts," Mitchell said calmly. "Edwin diverted client funds into shell accounts. Both believed their inheritance would erase the damage." "And the will they showed me?" I asked. Mitchell sighed. "An outdated version, intentionally misleading." He slid another document toward me. The real will. I already knew what it said, but seeing it printed, notarized, undeniable, changed everything. "Everything goes to you," Mitchell said, "and you decide if they receive anything at all." I leaned back slowly. "And the properties?" "He mortgaged them heavily," Mitchell replied. "If they inherit them, they inherit the debt." For the first time since Floyd died, I smiled. My phone buzzed constantly over the next 2 days. Sydney, Edwin, Bianca. Concern turned into urgency. Urgency turned into panic. Finally, Sydney left a voicemail. "Colleen, something's wrong. There are documents we don't recognize. We need to meet immediately." I called Mitchell. "I think it's time," I said. The conference room felt different when I walked in. Sydney and Edwin were already there. No confidence, no smiles. Martin Morrison sat at the head of the table, confused and uncomfortable. James Mitchell placed his briefcase down calmly. Sydney spoke first. "Colleen," he said, forcing a smile, "there's been some misinformation." "Misinformation?" I repeated. Mitchell opened his briefcase. "Forgery," he said. "Fraud. Elder financial abuse." The room went silent. Edwin's hands trembled. "You can't prove this," he whispered. Mitchell slid photographs across the table. Bank statements followed. Recorded calls. "You already did," Mitchell replied. Sydney stood abruptly. "This is extortion." "No," I said quietly. "This is consequence." I placed one final document on the table, a deed transfer. "I'm giving you the properties, exactly what you wanted." Relief flickered across Sydney's face. "Along with the mortgages," I added. His expression collapsed. "You'll owe more than they're worth. 30 days to refinance. After that, foreclosure." Edwin looked like he might be sick. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Mitchell answered. "Then we pursue criminal charges." No one spoke. Finally, Sydney signed. So did Edwin. They had no choice. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new home overlooking the ocean. Sydney filed for bankruptcy. Edwin lost his consulting license. Bianca left. I planted roses in the garden. I slept peacefully, and for the first time in decades, I lived for myself. The house felt different once it was finally mine again. Not legally, emotionally. For the first time since Floyd passed, I wasn't waiting for the next phone call, the next threat disguised as concern, the next demand wrapped in the word family. The silence was peaceful.
James Mitchell handled everything with precision. The funds Floyd had protected were transferred smoothly. The life insurance policies paid out quietly, far larger than the Sons ever imagined. I didn't celebrate. I exhaled. Sydney tried calling once more, then twice, then not at all. By the end of the month, his name appeared in court filings instead of my phone. Bankruptcy. Gambling rehabilitation, court-mandated. The man who once looked at me like a bad investment couldn't even look at his own reflection anymore. Edwin lasted a little longer. He tried negotiating with creditors, tried borrowing from people who no longer trusted him, tried blaming everyone except himself. Eventually, his consulting license was suspended. The clients he had betrayed finally spoke, and when they did, no inheritance could save him. Bianca left quietly. She took what she could carry and disappeared into someone else's guest room, someone else's life. The luxury cars were repossessed. The house was sold under pressure. Appearances collapse faster than people expect. I sold the properties I never wanted, not out of spite, out of freedom. I moved to a small coastal town where the mornings smelled like salt and the evenings arrived slowly, without urgency. I bought a modest home with a neglected garden, and every morning I worked with my hands, planting, pruning, rebuilding, the same way I rebuilt myself. Sometimes I thought about the moment I signed everything away, the looks on their faces, the certainty they carried. They believed kindness meant weakness, that silence meant ignorance, that grief meant surrender. They never once considered that Floyd knew exactly who they were, or that I had learned from him. One afternoon I received a letter, no return address. Inside was a single line, written in handwriting I recognized immediately. He really did love you. Edwin. No apology, no excuses, just acknowledgement. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some things don't need answers. I started volunteering, quietly. Women who had been financially trapped, emotionally cornered, legally confused. I didn't tell them my story. I listened to theirs, and when they asked how I knew what to do, I smiled. Experience, I said. Floyd once told me something I didn't understand until it was too late. The people who rush you are usually afraid of what you'll discover if you slow down. Now I understood. Final narration lines. Strong YouTube ending. They thought they erased me, but they only removed themselves. Revenge doesn't always come with shouting or courtrooms or chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with patience, preparation, and the truth. If you stayed till the end, tell me, what would you have done in my place? And remember, never underestimate the person who stays calm while everyone else is rushing.